Alright, Shalom Hebrews. This is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. Alright, Hebrews. Historical truths should be connected to spiritual truths. You know, your spiritual truth should be connected to historical truth. But some Hebrews' spiritual truths are connected to false history. And then they think that they spiritual, walking around and then don't know that they've been believing in false history. And I'm going to show how that the Israelites in the New Testament that believe in the New Testament doctrine, spiritualism, come off false history. You know, like I say, historical truths should be connected to spiritual truths, and spiritual truths should be connected to historical truths. But if you got some false history in your spiritual truth, then it's a crack, man. It's a crack, and it's a crack, and that ain't no good, man. You shouldn't have no holes in your spiritual truth or your historical truth that is connected to spiritual truth. And that if you got a hole in one or the other, then man, you can't be spiritual. You know, you can't be spiritual off no historical information. And a lot of Hebrews develop their spiritualism off of historical information like the New Testament. You know, the New Testament is supposed to be historical information about this demigod, this God's son that the Tanakh do not recognize, and that this demigod is supposed to be the savior of mankind. And then how you got a whole lot of Israelites believing in this, not understanding the history of the Israelites, you know, and how we then just blindly accept some history that was put on us in the slavery days. You know, that's like I say, your historical truths should be connected to spiritual truths. And that some of you Hebrews spiritual truths are connected to false history. And that ain't no good, and especially in this day and time. You know, this is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood, and then I want to show how that the Israelites who believe in the historical document called the New Testament, and then how that believing in the New Testament and developing your spiritualism off of that, then man, your spiritualism is wrong and it's incorrect, and because it's developed off false history, you know, false historical information. And then that's the way that these Israelites are that believe in demigod worship, man. How they getting tossed to and fro, man. They're getting tossed to and fro, and they constantly getting attacked. You know, the people who believe in the New Testament, because it's not a sound history, you gon' get attacked. And then that's what's happening, that people starting to analyze and go over that history that they done accepted, you know, and come to find out, man, that history is bogus. You know, that's like this. You know, a lot of Israelites that believe in the New Testament history don't have no understanding, zero understanding of who Ashkenazi are and when the Ashkenazi come into the Israelite history. You know, this history right here is what make you Israelites spiritualism off, you know, false history, you know, make you look bad. They believe in the New Testament is because you don't have an understanding of who Ashkenazi is and where Ashkenazi come from or how that they got in the Israelite history. Most Israelites just accept the explanation that Ashkenazi give you. He'll try to say that he went to Germany, and then from Germany, you know, he was called, you know, Ashkenazi. But, you know, history show that to be a lie. And that how Ashkenazi was a people, man, before the German nation was even thought of, and how Ashkenazi name go all the way back to Assyrian times, and how Ashkenazi destroyed Assyria and then chased us Israelites into Africa during the Babylonian Wars, and then settled in the Promised Land. I'm talking about settled in the Promised Land, and how that the average Israelite that tried to understand Israelite history don't have no understanding about this. They don't have no understanding about this. So that's why come I say your historical truth should be connected to your spiritual truths. And how some Hebrews spiritual truths are connected to false history. And then how that they walking around thinking that they so spiritual and got so much knowledge when they really don't. And how they really been made some fools out of, just like the people in history has been made fools out of when it come to understanding Israelite history. See, the average person don't know that the Israelites abandoned, we Israelites abandoned our heritage to two groups of peoples. And then, oh man, it's real serious with the first group of people that we abandoned our heritage to, because they was Babylonian scribes. They was responsible for the Babylonians' gods history. Nebo, Murdoch, Nabu, and all those gods in Aniki, the Mesopotamian god pantheon. That's what the Babylonian scribes, the Sephardim who settled in our land, but that was placed in our kingdom during the Assyrian wars, and then how the Ashkenazi was placed in the Israelite heritage during the Babylonian wars, and then how that the Israelites ain't never tried to understand those people's history that settled in our lands. Now, Israelites none accepted some history that the people that settled in our lands created, and then that's what make your spiritual truths untruth. That's what make your spirituality untruth, because you have accepted incorrect historical events in history that's been forged as a lie, and you didn't accept it as a truth, and then your spiritualism was developed off that. Man, that's a whole bunch of Israelites. Spiritualism is developed off false history. Off false history. And then, it comes from our parents accepting the slave doctrines, and then it being passed down today in one of the prize books that we accepted during the slavery days is what's called the New Testament in its history. And the average Israelite don't have a clue, man, about New Testament history. They just pick up the New Testament and read it and then accept it as facts, not knowing that the New Testament, man, was constructed by some real crafty people. Man, I'm talking about real crafty, the most craftiest people on the face of this earth with creating religions is going to be the people that we abandon our heritage to. Now, both groups, Ashkenazi and Sephardi, can be traced to Babylon. They could be traced to Babylon, and then we know that Babylon was like the center of false gods, creating false gods, colleges and schools, universities, studying fake gods, and how they whole culture and history is developed off the fallen angelic beings. That's the Mesopotamian history. That's gonna be that Canaanite culture that we Israelites was originally supposed to destroy. Well, how about some Israelites, men, then accepted the history that they created and then think that they got historical truths, and that their historical truths is connected to their spiritual truths, and that they one and the same. And I'm here to show you that you Hebrews spiritual truths are connected to false history. And then if your spiritual truth is connected to false history, then you ain't spiritual at all. You ain't spiritual at all. We're going to go look at during Assyrian times. We're going to go back to Assyrian times, and then we're going to walk it all the way down. And then we're going to see all the peoples that moved into the land and who would constitute the New Testament people. Because the New Testament people or the New Testament history is basically the history, the historical false truths that they got the Israelites spiritually blind and think that they, got historical truths and think that they have spiritual truths because they believe in the New Testament. And man, it's so far from the truth. And Israelites should know that once the covenant was broken, most Israelites don't even know the covenant was broken, and that they think that the that the Israelite nation just went somewhere singing and just having fun, and then they think that the Israelites went somewhere singing and having fun and partying during the Assyrian times. Israelites think that when the Assyrians came and that the problems that we was having with the Assyrians and that the Assyrians kidnapped 10 tribes and took them somewhere magically around the world, and how did they just partying right now? The 10 tribes, men supposed to be in the magical land where they went through a waterfall, and right now they supposed to be in existence somewhere off in the magical land is what our enemies, then created, with that false history. And then how you got Israelites believing in that same false history and then think that they got historical truths, and then how did they spiritualism is developed off that. They think that the Israelites during the Assyrian times, was taken 10 tribes, was taken by the Assyrians, and then how that they was taken to all these parts up north and all into Europe, and how 10 tribes just went everywhere, and then how did they still missing, and how they're so magical, and that that's what the enemy's been teaching y'all, and that's the history that they've been pushing. And like I say, a lot of Israelites history spiritualism is developed off false history, and then how Israelites think that they understand what's going on and be so far from the truth. We're gonna look at this. We're gonna look at this because during the Assyrian times, when the Assyrians so-called took 10 tribes, that they really didn't take 10 tribes at all, and that how only 3 tribes were taken: the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. And then how that after the Assyrian captivity, we get through that, and then how the next problems would be the Babylonians, and then how all the Israelites were home after the Assyrian captivity to have to deal with the Babylonian captivity, and then how after the Babylonian captivity all the Israelites were chased into Africa, and that how like 1% come back home from the Mesopotamian captivity during the Babylonian wars. And then I show how they was destroyed because it was impossible for them to live on the land and share the land with the very people that drove us into Africa. And that's going to be the Scythians, Ashkenazi. See, Israelites don't have Ashkenazi in their history. Israelites don't have the Sephardis in their history, and then that's what make your spiritual truths that's connected to history false. And then how that your historical truths should be connected to spiritual truth, and your spiritual truths connected to historical truths. But if you got false history and you didn't accept that as truth, then your spiritual truth gonna be false. It's impossible to escape that. And then how most Israelites don't know that Ashkenazi settled in our land during the Babylonian wars and was never driven out. And that if Ashkenazi settled in our land and then was never driven out, and that, most Israelites can't tell who was the difference between Ashkenazi and the Sephardis and all these different peoples that settled in the promised land after the Babylonian wars. Man, I'm talking about a lot of nations settled in the promised land. But the most important is going to be the Scythians, who are Ashkenazi, and how Ashkenazi got our heritage today, but how the majority of the Israelites looked blindly past that and were sweeping down that Ashkenazi come about, from Germany, and that the Jews went, to Germany and became Ashkenazi, and then how that's all false, and that the whole Israelite community history is based upon this. They don't know nothing about Ashkenazi and the Sephardi, so that makes they historical truths false, and they spiritual truth false, because they don't understand Ashkenazi and the Sephardi's heritage, and then how some Israelites just move forward and just accept, the history that's been given to them, and then call that spiritual truths. Man, it's messed up. Well, the Israelite Brotherhood ain't finna let us go out like that. The Israelite Brotherhood ain't finna let us go out like that, and we can show that you Israelites who believe in the New Testament got false spiritual truths, because you're dealing with false history, and there's no way to get around that. If you Israelites don't know when Ashkenazi settled in our land, then you don't have no truth. And if you can't account for Ashkenazi history while they settled in our land throughout the duration of settling the land from the Babylonian wars to now, if you can't account for Ashkenazi history, then your historical history about the Israelite history is incorrect. So therefore, your spiritual history is incorrect. If you can't account for the Sephardi's and explain their heritage in relation to Israelite heritage, and when the Sephardi's come into the Israelite heritage, then your historical truth is off, and then therefore your spiritual truth is off, because you can't explain how these peoples got into our heritage. And if you can't explain how these peoples got into our heritage, but you accepting this biblical history about our heritage and don't include them in it, then your history is false, and your spiritual history is false. Your spiritual truth is false. A lot of Israelites don't understand how them people got into our heritage. They have no clue. They have no clue, and they ain't even trying to come up with no answers. They ain't even trying to come up with no answers. Most Hebrews ain't even trying to come up with no answers of how Ashkenazi got into the Israelite heritage, and at what point did it happen. Most folks don't even have no understanding of who Ashkenazi is, where they even come from in relations to the Israelite heritage. And then, like I say, if your Israelite history is off, your spiritual truth is off. If your Israelite history is off and false, then your spiritualism is going to be false, because our whole spiritualism and understanding come from the biblical history. Come from the biblical history. Come from the biblical history. So there's no escaping. If your history is false, your spiritualism is false. And if your spiritualism is false, then you ain't, this spiritual genius that you claiming to be or want to be, Ashkenazi, or the Scythians in history. They settled in the promised land during the Babylonian wars. They were never basically ever driven out during the Islam time is when Ashkenazi finally got dislodged from the promised land, but he tried to stay there through the Christian organizations that he created. Whereas Ashkenazi had been ran the Sephardi's from the promised land and got their power in 70 AD through proxy from the Roman Catholic Church that Ashkenazi created. He would uproot the Sephardis, who we abandoned our heritage to in 722 BC. Where they was placed in our land in 722 BC, and we abandoned our heritage to them during the Babylonian Wars. And they was in our land like 134 years before we ran off. And that how did them two groups, Ashkenazi and the Sephardis, got the Israelite heritage. And if your spiritualism don't explain this, and if your historical history that developed your spiritualism don't explain this, then your spiritualism off, because your history is off. And those are the Jewish groups. And we abandoned our heritage to the Sephardi's. We was chased out by Ashkenazi, and Ashkenazi name is Scythian. And if you can't account for them in Israelite history, then your historical truth is off, and your spiritual awareness is off. Nineveh. All right, the Battle of Nineveh. The Battle of Nineveh in 612 BC. The Scythians, who is Ashkenazi, with the Elamites and a few other folks. What it was is that the Assyrians, who had kidnapped us, the fighters, and that created the Neo-Assyrian Empire, where the Assyrians had all these non-pigmented peoples, the Caucasians, on lockdown, robbing them, jacking them. They couldn't move. And then how Assyria had all them under control. And then how that Assyria started to lose its grip and its control on them folks. Because they got some sinning Israelites with them that do Egyptian religion. So, that's going to bring the Assyrian Empire down, because they done kidnapped some Israelites that's up under judgment from Almighty Yah for destruction, because they are doing Egyptian worship, and we up under the curses we up under the prophecies for the curses that Prophet Moses give us since 1406 BC, that how the northern kingdom could not escape, because we was given that covenant as an ethnic group. So there's no escaping the Creator's wrath. He know who all the ethnic groups are on the face of this earth. You can't escape him. But how did the Israelites, our ancestors, was given a covenant to get rid of the Egyptian in the Mesopotamian religions, but how we succumb to the Egyptian religion. And then when the Assyrians kidnapped those three tribes, and then how that we was fighting the Scythians, Ashkenazi, and all those other non-pigmented peoples that come from underground in Turkey and so forth, and come out the Caucasus Mountain, and that hung in the Zagros and so forth. All them folks, all them gonna be non-pigmented people, and how the mixed Assyrians were robbing them, and then how that those folks got the power to overcome the Assyrians, because, like I say, the Assyrians kidnapped the three tribes that was on Egyptian religion. So if it's judgment on us to be destroyed because of the curses Moses gave us, then that those tribes that was taken to Assyria wasn't gonna be able to help and defend Assyria like they wanted to. And then I even got history, about this, where I show Baratuda and Ashkenazi's roots, in Assyria, and then how that they was in Assyria, and then getting the education, and then how did they decided to take Assyria down, and then all this is recorded in Tanakh history. The thing about it, that's why I say that your spiritual truths got to be connected to historical truths, and that if your spiritual truth is not connected to historical truths, then you don't have no spiritual truth, and then you're not this spiritual person and so forth that you think you is, because your history is off, All right, Ashkenazi, the Scythians, Baratuda, son Midas, King Midas, he gonna be the one that destroyed Assyria, and how that they would be hanging around Assyria, and then Assyria, went to destroy Media and Elam, and they was robbing, and how Prophet Jonah had come there and told them to stop robbing because they had some of the Israelites with them. I could show that we did trade with the Assyrians way before this so-called Assyrian captivity, and how that our enemies wrote our history up wrong because they trying to hide their heritage. You see, that's why I say that if you ain't got historical truth, now a lot of Israelites' historical and spiritual so-called truths is developed off false history that our enemies created, and they don't have no clue what's going on, but they walking around thinking that they spiritual now. They real spiritual, you know what I'm saying? But they don't know they so far from spirituality and truths, and that they done accepted history that our enemies created unknowingly, you know. All right, so we see that, Ashkenazi was in Assyria, and that, the Syrians was robbing them at first, and then, they got up in Syria, and then how they eventually destroyed Assyria. Okay, the Assyrians had set up what's called the Sephardi kings in Egypt, and I think it was 697 BCE when Assyria went and took the the kingdom from the Nubians, the Nubian Ethiopian stock from Upper Egypt, and gave it to the power to the Lower Egyptian, the Mishwish, my tribes, who Ephraim and Manasseh was kin to. This is just before Assyria was destroyed by Ashkenazi. And then how that when Assyria was getting destroyed, Assyria had an open door, meaning to the promised land. And I can show this, man, in history, how it was prophesied that it would happen. All right, if you go to, I think that's Isaiah. Let's go to Isaiah. Let me see, that'll be Isaiah 19. 19:19. Now, even the prophets say that this would happen. And it come to pass just before Assyria was destroyed, and it's called the Satai history, Saite, the Satai history of Egypt. And the Assyrians, put the Egyptians, Lower Egypt, on the throne, who we was kin to, and then how that they would run into Africa when they got destroyed by the Scythians. They would all come, into our lands, into Africa. All right, in that day, this is Isaiah 19:23. In that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrians shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptians into Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. In that day shall Israel be the third with Egypt, even and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land, and whom the Elohim of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the works of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. So, the history that we've been taught about Assyria has been incorrect. Incorrect. And then how that, Ashkenazi destroyed Assyria, and then would come chase, us Israelites into Africa under the name Chaldean. And then how that they were settled in the promised land. And then this when it all, the history really started, is when they settled in the promised land. And then how they've been trying to be quiet about it. But how the Israelites today base their spiritualism off false history, not knowing that Ashkenazi, under the name Scythian, had settled in the promised land. Now remember, Babylon came and took the promised land over in 588 BC, and was only driven out, only defeated and lost power in 538 BC, and how that the Scythians lived in the promised land with no problems, unmolested for 50 years, and how that was enough time to call other Scythians and other peoples to move into the promised land. And then that would be one of the reasons why you would get all them synagogues everywhere, because Ashkenazi couldn't go to Herd-built temple. You know, Herd temple was built when Herd took the temple the exiles repaired on that had been destroyed quite a few times after the Persians, and then how did Herd took it all the way down and then built him a brand new one in 20 BC. And then how Ashkenazi had the synagogues. So whenever you're reading in the New Testament about synagogues, you're reading about Ashkenazi settlement in the Promised Land. Now, Ashkenazi settled during the Babylonian Wars. Now, then during the Persian times, he being quiet. And then come to find out, Ashkenazi made up Alexander's army to go defeat the Persians. All right, once the Persians was defeated, meaning the whole promised land in our enemy's hand from then on out, and that how Almighty Yah didn't send no more liberators to try to liberate the little small percentage that would have been on the promised land, because they was destroyed and gone by Greek time. Destroyed and grown by Greek time, and those would be the Israelites that returned from the Babylonian captivity. And how I show that the 99%, all the tribes ran into Africa during the beginning of the Babylonian Wars. That's well documented. I might even show a little of that history just to show that you Israelites, they got historical, think that you got historical truths and spiritual truths off the New Testament, and how that you so far from truth, and how that you don't know what's going on. But you see, Ashkenazi destroyed Assyria in 612 BC, and then they will come to our land. And then I'm gonna read this little history, and then I'm gonna show, how they come to our land. Man, this little history is good right here about the Scythians. Man, first let's establish that Ashkenazi is the Scythians. But because most Israelites, they don't know this. They don't know that Ashkenazi is the Scythians. Look, Ashkenazi. The kingdom of Ashkenazi was first associated with the Scythian region. The Scythians. Ashkenazi is the Scythians. And then if you look in Assyria history, look, his name is related to Assyrian, Ashkenazi. See, they've been called Ashkenazi, which is a ethnic pointer term, and how Ashkenazi existed before Germany. See what I'm saying? Ashkenazi existed before the Jews went to Germany, and how Ashkenazi was in the promised land since the Babylonian Wars, under the name Scythian, and how Ashkenazi and the Scythians is one and the same. Even though some of the Scythians didn't all make it down to the promised land as this one group did, but how that they was all the same peoples, and how that the ones that made it to the promised land from chasing us out the promised land, from destroying Assyria, and then come chasing us out the promised land, them will be the first ones to get educated in that how Scythia in Germany is their homeland also. Man, the whole Europe, especially Ukraine, man, a whole lot of Japhetic tribes and so forth that Ashkenazi mingled with when he went from the promised land to Europe, and didn't convert just everybody just then, and that how eventually, he would start converting folks, but how he would, live among his people in Germany, but how his name go all the way back to Assyrian times. And I just showed you that Ashkenazi was first associated with the Scythians, and then how that the Scythians destroyed Assyria. See, look, Ashkenazi, these are Ashkenazi name in the Assyrian Chronicles. So there's no getting away with Ashkenazi being Scythians. And then look, the Scythians were settled mean they settled in the land, and this is what they real slick about. They don't want you to know that they settled in the promised land during the Babylonian Wars. Because that's a dead giveaway. If you know that Ashkenazi settled in the promised land during the Babylonian Wars, and then start calling themselves Israelites, and then portraying to be Israelites, and doing the things that the Israelites supposed to be doing, then it's evidently, you know what I'm saying, that's elementary, evidently right there that, you can understand that Ashkenazi got his heritage from the Israelites, from settling. So they didn't just write about Ashkenazi settling during the Babylonian Wars, and how did they use that Scythian name like a light switch. They'll turn it on when they ain't talking about biblical history, and then they'll turn it off when they talking about biblical history. And then how Ashkenazi settled during the Babylonian Wars. See, if Israelites historical truths ain't got this in it, then your spiritual truth gonna be off, because you got to know that Ashkenazi settled in the land in order for your history to be correct about Israelite history. All right, look, Scythopolis. That's where they settled. Scythopolis, the land of the Scythians. Scythopolis is gonna be where they settled in one of the land, the capital that they call in the Discopolis city, and how Scythopolis was the head one, and this is gonna be where they create Christianity and get it good and start, and how all the bishops and all the people that started Christianity came and flocked here and hung around her and so forth, and how Israelites don't have a clue about this. No understanding, zero understanding about this. Look, Scythopolis meant to, ancient Beth Shean had a Christian community headed by a bishop even even before the Edict of Milan, or even the Council of Nicaea in 332 BC. You know what I'm saying? So they was already doing legalized Christianity. Ashkenazi was, because Christianity was created to combat those Sephardi Jews that got an Israelite heritage that didn't fully embrace Ashkenazi. And I can show this right here. They'll tell you this right here. Look. The Sephardic ideal has always been understood in terms of political moderation and community unity. Rarely did Sephardim lose their internal cohesion, that is, until the process of cultural erosion set in. Do you know what cultural erosion set in following the Ashkenazi lead? Sephardim abandoned their traditional culture and adapted to the fractious Ashkenazi model. They didn't have no choice. They didn't have no choice, because Ashkenazi been whooping them through the proxy organizations that they created, like Christianity. If you notice in history, Ashkenazi always prosper and got all kind of synagogues going on in Christian held lands, and how that the Christian leaders always rely on the Ashkenazi rabbi for guidance and so forth, and look up to them as the holy people. See, that's what Christianity look up to Ashkenazi as the holy people. And a lot of Israelites don't know that the New Testament is basically Ashkenazi history. A Edomite Jew trying to convert Ashkenazi over to some religions that they created in the Egyptian mystery system to get Ashkenazi off of the Israelite heritage, and that how the Sephardi was their last attempt to try to get Ashkenazi up off the Israelite heritage, so they could be the main dominant group that got our heritage. And that how Ashkenazi created Christianity and drove them folks out, drove them to their old hiding spot, Spain and Portugal. And then the Catholic Church come chase them from there over into the Americas and so forth, and how that they've been having proxy wars for a long time. And this how all the religions in the wars in the Western culture come about, because those two groups fighting over the Israelite heritage, and how that the Sephardi would go and create Islam in the heart of the Edomites' heritage, and that how Islam would be used to fight the Christian groups like the Crusaders, who was controlled by Ashkenazi, and then how that the Sephardis control Islam, and like I explained in the video, how Muhammad whole history about the Israelites is incorrect, because he developed his whole history and understanding of the Tanakh based upon the Sephardims. The Sephardims, who are Sephardis, who are the Sephardims that was placed in Samaria in 722 BC, and how that Muhammad didn't know who the real Israelites were, and that how all his understandings about the children Israel and creating a religion based upon that is false. And that's another thing, how Israelites got historical so-called historical truths, you know what I'm saying, off these false religions. And then when you come look at the false religions history, then man, they can't have no correct spiritualism off, false history. And that's how it go with the religions, and how the Sephardis prosper in Muslim-held countries, do good, real good, like Ashkenazi prosper in Christian countries. It's because them two groups created them religions to fight against each other. And then, that's been going on. Look, the Sephardic idea has always been understood in terms of political moderation and community unity. Rarely did Sephardim lose their internal cohesion, that is, until the process of cultural erosion set in. Following the Ashkenazi lead, Sephardim abandoned their traditional culture and adapted to the fractious Ashkenazi model under the rubric of a single Jewish nation. The Sephardi, particularly with its cultural genius and sophisticated social morals, has become a lost value. The Ashkenazi culture, with its deeply unsettled relationship to the larger world, has now become the Jewish standard. So, Ashkenazi defeated the Sephardis. Ashkenazi defeated them. And then, like I say, Ashkenazi history go all the way back then to when they settled in our land after the Babylonian Wars. And then how Israelites don't understand this, and then how Israelites just think the New Testament was made up of Israelites, not knowing that it's a 500-year separation between the close of the Tanakh and 430 BC, then the creation of the New Testament in around 100 AD or something like that. But look, Scythopolis, Christian community headed by a bishop even before the Edict of Medellin in 313 legalized profession Christianity in the Romans. So they was Ashkenazi, the Scythians were Christians before it was legalized in the Roman world, showing you that they created Christianity just point blank. When the Roman province of Palestina, Casuna, was set up in the 4th century with the Scythopolis as its capital, the bishopric became the metropolitan sees, and that's the military branch and everything. The sees, meaning the holy sees. Oh man, that's the power and the might of the Roman Empire. Look, it was part of what was called the Discopolis. One of the Discopolis cities, a group of cities founded by retired veterans of Alexander the Great. In this case, probably a Scythian unit. Now, what it was is that those Scythians went and destroyed the Persians with Alexander, because those are going to be Japhetic tribes. The Romans and the Greeks and all those are Japhetic tribes. So, Ashkenazi going to go help his peoples, but how they been trying to hide this in history. They don't want it to be plainly known that Ashkenazi settled in the Israelite heritage, because then, the world wouldn't have went for all this stuff that's been going on. But look how Ashkenazi people come from here, the Greeks and the Romans. And then they went and whooped the Persians. Ashkenazi was with them, because the Persians gonna be whooped on Ashkenazi. See, the Assyrians, the Persians, all them were pigmented peoples, and the creator, called Cyrus way before he was born, and by about 150 years before he was born, during Prophet Isaiah times. He called about Cyrus and how Cyrus, the Persians, would free the exiles that was taken during the Babylonian wars from the Promised Land, taken to the Mesopotamian area, and how that they couldn't do the covenant up off the Promised Land. So you know that they had to get on back to the Promised Land, because it was even told them that they should come home after the Babylonians were destroyed by the Persians, that if they didn't, they would be cut off. And then how you know that they couldn't do the covenant in a strange land, as the Jews try to make you think that it was possible for the Israelites to do the covenant off the Promised Land. And that's why you see Jews everywhere doing the covenant all over, everywhere up off the Promised Land. You know, and how that's false and impossible. That was false and impossible, and how it couldn't be no two covenants. We done already broke the covenant for Egyptian religion. We had already broke the covenant for Egyptian religion. All right, Hebrews, let's look some more at this here. Because, you know, your spiritual truth should be connected to historical truths, and you shouldn't have no false history and thinking, man, that you got some spiritual truths when your history false. All right, so we see the Ashkenazi settled in Bethshan, and then, you know what I'm saying, everybody know that Ashkenazi was with the Babylonians during Assyrian times. So, you know, they were settled in the Promised Land, and then when the Greeks come, they folks go to destroy the Persians to seal our faith. They was part of that. Look, in 612, Nabopolassar united the Babylonian army with an army of Medes and Scythians, and led a campaign which captured the Syrian, you know what I'm saying, and destroyed Assyria. They destroyed Assyria, you know. All right, let's look. It's a whole bunch going on. Man, I want to read this right here. Look. The Scythian domination of Western Asia has for centuries been known, from Herodotus mentioned, but other evidence for it emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Assyrian records and letters mentioning the Ashkenazi. The Assyrians called the Scythians, you know, Ashkenazi. They tell you that the Assyrians called the Ashkenazi Scythians, who were revealed in the 19th century when the geographic and the ethnic names of the Assyrian world began to be properly understood from the decipherment of cuneiform texts. The same increase of knowledge began to give background and point to Hebrew prophecies, as in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. You know what I'm saying? I got plenty of videos explaining this. These describe pearls and threatening movements. Archaeology in the 20th century has revealed some Scythian objects, or objects showing the influence of Scythian metalwork in Western Asia. Meaning the Scythians shot the Promised Land up with arrowheads that's being found right now today. Man, they still got arrowheads being found today. Man, I show in plenty of videos how the Scythian arrowheads, that's Ashkenazi arrowheads, found all over the Promised Land. Found all over the Promised Land. And this would be Ashkenazi, man. See, a lot of Israelites' spiritual truths, man, it's off because they historical truth is off. So your spiritual truth gonna be off if your historical truth is off. So, you know, Ashkenazi came to the Promised Land and shot it up with them bow and arrows. With the arrows, I even got pictures of the arrows. If I find them somewhere, any pictures of them arrows. Man, he shot so many arrows at them that they still finding them right now today. I'll probably have to find that another time. Yeah, they shot the Promised Land up with arrows that they still finding today. All right. Scythian objects. All right, showing the influence of Scythian metalwork in Western Asian objects discovered somewhere early in the Scythian tombs and north of the Caucasus could now be seen to be Scythian plunder from the Near East. You know, but man, they were settled men in the promised land. As I have shown, how did they settle in the promised land after the Babylonian wars? And ain't nothing gonna change that. Can't nothing change that. So you Israelites, they got your spiritual truth, and you ain't accounting for Ashkenazi settling in our promised land, settling in the promised land, then your history is off. Man, it's like this here, that Apostle Paul, Paul supposed to have come from Turkey, out of all places, Turkey. There ain't no Israelites up here hanging around in no Greek colonies, and that all the Jews during Greek times is going to be the Sephardi and Ashkenazi moving around, and that how no Israelites were around to move around during the Greek times, because it was only a small percentage, and I could show that they only lived in Jerusalem and in the cities thereby, and how eventually they was driven out, died, got the land taken from them because they started mortgaging the land and so forth. All right, men, let's look at this Paul devil. All right, Paul, the Apostle Paul, commonly known as Saint Paul. Saint Paul, in the Hebrew name, and such and such, was a Christian apostle, although not one of the 12 apostles who spread the teachings of Jesus in the 21st century. Man, that's another thing, man, about this Jesus thing. That's like Jesus' genealogy. A lot of Israelites don't know that the story of Jesus is constructed by a whole bunch of Jesus. Man, it took a whole bunch of Jesus history. That's why come the genealogies don't line up. The genealogies don't line up, and you got 3 different histories of Jesus. One of them coming in when he was an adult, and man, all kind of different histories of Jesus. That's because those are gonna be these individuals that they took their histories. They took their history. All of them lived during Jesus' time, during the Roman and Greek times. You know what I'm saying? They lived. And then how did they would take their history, and then that would be the history in the New Testament. And then that's why Jesus got 3 different births. Jesus got 3 different births because they done took the history from one of these Jesuses here that lived during that time, and that's their history. Now, you can go check out all these Jesus' history and Jewish sources that they in the history. And then how you could type in these names and it'll come up, and you can match which Jesus history go with which genealogy. And then how Mark, Luke, and all them dudes, wasn't even followers of Jesus, and how that they story was wrote by somebody else, and that they was given that name and so forth. Man, that's why come I say that people, your spiritual truth got to be connected to historical truths, and that it can't be no crack in your historical truth, because it's going to be a crack in your spiritual truth. Look, all right, Paul was a Christian apostle, but not of the 12 apostles who spread the teachings of Jesus in the first century. Paul is generally considered one of the most important figures of the apostolic age, and from the 30s to the mid 50s AD, he founded several Christian communities in Asia Minor and Europe. Asia Minor and Europe. Now, I'm going to show you how these devils is wicked, because the Tanakh show plainly that the Israelites went into Africa during the Babylonian wars, and how none of Jesus or none of his disciples went into Africa looking for the Israelites that would eventually be enslaved. Look, man, according to the New Testament book, Acts of the Apostles, Paul participated in the persecution in the Emirate Christian movement, more Hellenized diaspora Jewish members in the area of Jerusalem. Prior to his conversion, in the narrative act, Paul was traveling on the road from Jerusalem to Damascus on a mission to arrest them and bring them back to Jerusalem. When he seen this light, and I can go show you that he got about 3-4 different versions of the light, how he met Jesus. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, many peoples get to analyzing Paul's the Paulians' doctor, man, and they say that junk ain't straight, and how that it's forgeries and it's inconsistent history and it's all messed up. Man, it's like I can almost show how Paul told a lie. and see that if he get you to believe, you know what I'm saying, in Jesus, that if he tell a lie and get you to believe in Jesus, that is all to their good. You know what I'm saying? And that'll be Romans 3:7. Let me see that. Romans 3:7. If Paul, give what Paul say. Now, if your history is created, if your spiritualism is created off false history, then your spiritualism is gonna be false. Romans 3:7. All right, let's see. Romans 3:7. For if the truth of God hath more abound through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I judged as a sinner? Man, because you told a lie. You can't tell a lie to justify Almighty Yah. That ain't making no sense. All right, and then if you look over here, you know, and then read these stories, about Paul and how he, turned into a Jesus believer, you're gonna see that he was telling a lie. And Saul yet breathing, this is Acts 9, and Saul yet breathing out threatening and slaughter, against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogue, that if he found any of this way, whether they were of men or women. See, Paul was probably a Ashkenazi, because here it is in the synagogue, getting letters from the dudes in the synagogues instead of the temple and stuff. And her Edomite temple was around during that time. It got destroyed in 70 AD, but how he was up in the synagogues. And the synagogues gonna be by Ashkenazi, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou prosecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, and said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Now let's go see what Acts 22 got to say about this. Acts 22. And then now Paul ain't supposed to be the folks supposed to heard a voice but see no man. Look, and the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice but seeing no man. But then when we get to Acts 22, and Paul saying the same thing. Look, men, brethren, fathers, hear ye my decree, which I make now unto you. And when they heard him speaking the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he said, I am verily a man, a Jew, born in Tyrus, right up here in Turkey now. In Turkey. Out of all places where the devil's underground, where the Hittites and Ashkenazi and them live. You know, the city of Selica, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, zealous toward God at all, and yet with all the days, and I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into the prison both men and women, as also the high priest doeth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom I also received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished. And it come to pass that as I made my journey, and was come night unto Damascus around noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell into the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he answered, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were affrighted, but they heard not the voice of him that spake unto me. But over here it says, and the men that journeyed, and the men which journeyed with me stood speechless, hearing a voice but seeing no man. But over here it says, and they that were journeyed with me saw indeed the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake unto me. So, Paul already told you that he'll tell a lie to get you to believe what he wants you to believe, his version of what, should be believed of and about Jesus and so forth. And then I show that whole Jesus story is garbage. Garbage. So, we see, what happened, after the Scythians settled, you get all kind of confusions. And then, after so long, the people start believing that them was the original Israelites. That's like the Apocryphal books gonna be wrote by the Sephardis during the Greek times. After they got control of our heritage, they started writing all kind of books. And how that those books can be traced to the Greek times. And then how did everybody start writing books. Everybody started writing books, during the Greek times. And then, the people that settled in our land, when the real Israelites was destroyed and gone, that the enemies started writing books and so forth. And then that's what happened. So, the Apocryphal books was written during Greek time. And that's like the Christian books, the Jesus books, were written in Greek. And Jesus supposed to spoke Aramaic to people of the land. Yet it was during Roman times. Well, what they spoke Roman, Latin is Roman, or Romanist language. So it's all messed up. And if your spirituality is connected to false history, then your spirituality gonna be false. So you got a lot of Israelites walking around thinking that they spiritually correct because they think that they got historical correct information, and they don't. And they don't. It's sad. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna listen to this. Man, I'm gonna listen to this dude, and then we're gonna see what he say. All this stuff, man, took part after we Israelites abandoned the covenant. All this old evil, wicked stuff come about after we Israelites, man, abandoned the covenant for Egyptian religion.
Jesus as another kind of legend, this time a legend that is in the New Testament. The Gospel accounts. The Gospel of Mark does not have a genealogy, probably because it does not have an account of Jesus' birth. Mark's Gospel begins with Jesus as an adult. The same is true with the Gospel of John. It begins with Jesus as an adult. Matthew and Luke, however, are the two Gospels in the New Testament that tell stories about Jesus being born. And so, in both Matthew and Luke, in addition to birth narratives, you also are given genealogies, in which you have the family line of Jesus traced back to his remote ancestors. Just a second, I don't want to get the historical reality. The interesting thing about the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, there are several interesting things. The most interesting thing to many modern readers is that the two genealogies of Jesus in Matthew and Luke are different genealogies. They're different. They're different in a lot of ways.
That's because these Jesus right here.
Some of the ways don't matter and some do matter.
And it took
One
these
way
Jesus.
that may not matter is that Matthew's genealogy is set up to show that Jesus descended from King David and he descended from Abraham. And so the genealogy begins, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Well, who's that? Okay, so David is the greatest king in Jewish history, and it was understood that his descendant would be the future Messiah. And so by saying that Jesus is the son of David, Matthew is indicating that he's the Messiah. But he's also called the son of Abraham. Why Abraham? Because Abraham is the father of the Jews. The Jews trace their lineage back to Abraham. And so, Jesus' genealogy is traced back to Abraham. As many of you know, Matthew's gospel is often thought to be the most Jewish of the gospels, and so it traces Jesus' Jewish lineage. Luke's genealogy, in some ways, is even more interesting, because it does trace Jesus back to David and back to Abraham, but that's not the emphasis. Jesus' genealogy in Luke's gospel is traced back to Adam, as in Adam and Eve. That's a great genealogy. I have an aunt who's a genealogist who is very proud about the fact that she's traced my family line back to the Mayflower. The Mayflower, Adam and Eve. Serious genealogy. The logic of Adam's genealogy, of Luke's genealogy, is that unlike Matthew wants to show that Jesus is the Savior to the Jews, the Jewish Messiah, Luke wants to emphasize that Jesus is the Savior of all people, Jews and Gentiles. And so his line is traced back to the first human, to Adam himself. So that's a difference, but it's not a discrepancy or a contradiction, it's just a difference. The discrepancy is that the family line of Jesus is traced back through Joseph to David in different lines. Now, let me make a couple points about that. First, the genealogies are both genealogies of Joseph. That should strike you as very strange, because both Matthew and Luke insist that Jesus was born of a virgin. Joseph was not his father. But the genealogy is the genealogy of Joseph. But Jesus doesn't belong to that family line. Well, the Gospels don't give us an answer to that one. I think you have to assume that he was adopted by Joseph, and so he was sort of adopted into the line, but he's not part of the bloodline, which is the point of a genealogy. Neither of the Gospels trace the line of Mary. They're both tracing Joseph. But what is even more interesting is that they're different genealogies of Joseph. If you look carefully, you don't have to look too carefully, just read what it says. Ask yourself, who is Joseph's father? It depends whether you're reading Matthew or Luke. Who's his grandfather? Different names. Great-grandfather? Different names. Different names all the way from Joseph back to King David. In Matthew's genealogy, Joseph descends from David's son Solomon. In Luke's genealogy, he descends from David's son Nathan. Well, how can that be? Well, it can't be, literally. What's going on here is that both of these authors want to trace the genealogy of Jesus, and the reality is they don't know. I mean, how would they know? People have this mistaken notion that in the ancient world, everybody kept detailed records of these things. People did not keep detailed records of these things. And so Matthew and Luke have had to do the best they could to come up with genealogies of Jesus for purposes of their own. The historical reality is we don't know who Joseph's father or grandfather or great-grandfather was.
All right, shalom, Hebrews. This is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. You see, if you got historical truths, and then, you're going to have some spiritual truths. But if you got false history, then your spiritual truths going to be false. Man, it's going to be false, man. Your spirituality going to be off because you got false history. And you Israelites that's believing in the New Testament doctrine, your spirituality is off. I don't care how you can hoop and holler all you want to. It ain't going to change the fact that your history is off. This is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. I didn't show how Ashkenazi settled in the Promised Land. And then if Ashkenazi settled in the Promised Land, then, and never left nowhere, then, man, that's that on that. And then that's what happened. And then that's the people in the New Testament. Shalom, Hebrews. Is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. Wake up, Hebrews. We can't keep being misled on this Israelite history.